Let me say straight away that when Vladimir Putin and his minions in the Kremlin murdered Alexei Navalny last February, I was so mad I could hardly see straight. I was distraught, I was mournful, I was traumatized because I had become transfixed by this remarkable man, by his moral character, by his moral clarity, his courage, by his physical valor. And I have asked myself repeatedly, as Clara Allen points out, my fascination with Navalny may have been as well an element of envy or resentment even. Because as Ms. Allen notes, we humans are often envious of those who have the strength to act when our own nerves fail. Alexei Navalny was a far more courageous man than I, there's no question. What manner of man was this Navalny? Well, he was young, in his 40s, husband, father, and what were his transgressions? How did he provoke the ire of his assassins? Simple. He dared to speak out forcibly and fearlessly against the brutal methods of a cruel, callous, and corrupt autocrat. He was targeted because of his unwavering support for the ideals of human dignity, human decency, because he was the fierce champion of free elections in the Russian Empire. That is why he was killed. He was killed because of his constant dissent. In his role as prophet, Navalny made the Putins of this world squirm. You know, autocrats fear the truth. They much prefer the safety and comforts of life within the cocoons of their own invention. Life in an alternative universe. Alexei Navalny was clear-eyed about his risks. He knew the limits of cruelty that his tormentors had. He knew that it was limitless. He had, after all, already been subjected to imprisonment and torture by the regime. He had already been close to death by poisoning. He knew that return to Russia from his perch in Germany would probably mean giving up his life. He knew it, but he returned anyway to speak out for freedom, to die for truth. Greater love has no man, said Jesus, than this, that he should lay down his life for his friends. Fannie Lou Hamer. Fannie Lou was not killed in the direct dramatic fashion of an election of Navalny, but it is uncontestably the case that her life was cut short by the ravages of American racism. For unlike myself, who grew up in the Deep South, but in a tempered sort of racism, I grew up where racism might be considered benign. Fannie Lou Hamer's childhood was marked by unremitting racial brutality, Mississippi brutality, a brutality that insisted that black people never forget their place in society. Mrs. Hamer knew, even as a child, what it was to be slapped in the face by a strange white man. She knew what it was all about because she experienced it. She saw it routinely. She knew what it felt like to pick cotton for 12 hours in an unforgiving sun and not be paid. She lived it. Fannie Lou Hamer was evicted from her home at a moment's notice with no place to turn for shelter. She was sterilized without her consent and against her will. And of course, agitating for black voting rights in Mississippi in her day was the most fraught undertaking. So that's racism. Racism at its most brutal, with intimidation as its aim. But thank God, Fannie Lou Hamer refused intimidation. She lifted her voice passionately and eloquently on behalf of her people, exposing the indignities, the degradations that they suffered in a voice so compelling that it seized the imagination of the nation and helped begin the process to deliver Mississippi from the dark ages. And so, as we fall to silence now, before listening to the words of Martin Luther, the prophet, the greatest prophet of the modern age, let us reflect upon the stories of Alexis Navalny and Fannie Lou Hamer, that our own lives may become freer, richer, and more committed. A reading from Revelations. And I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the old heaven and the old earth had passed away. And then this from the book of Amos, the book of Amos. This is the God in heaven admonishing and teaching his people on the subject of righteousness, where he says, I abhor your hypocrisies. I hate, I despise your feast days, and I take no part in your solemn assemblies. Take away from me the noise of your songs, for I will not hear the melody of your harps. But rather, do this. Hear me well. Let justice roll down as waters, and righteousness like a mighty stream. Let justice roll down as waters, and righteousness like a mighty stream. And so, we have it within our grasp. to create a new world in this old world where justice and righteousness prevail. My beloved friends, I need not pause to say how happy I am to be with you today, and yet when I come to this sacred place, before this historic congregation, I am boundless in my admiration for you, and I come in and I come in humility. And I come with a renewed faith in the miraculous healing power of love. America promised the world of an experiment in union. The United States of America. It was to be a place where people from all over the world could live together in harmony with liberty and justice for all. It was to be a radical break from the past, governed by tribes and sects. Here in the United States, everyone was welcomed. No caste, no preferred classes, no exceptions. Liberty and justice for all. Well, American racism has corrupted and defiled that promise, and it has done so from the outset. Negroes have always been excluded from the covenant. And that is the sickness in the American soul that must be excised. To conceive of our struggle for freedom is simply a petition for Negro agency is to misapprehend. Ours is rather a struggle meant to heal the soul of a divided nation. A nation which promises one thing and delivers another, delivers its opposite. That is what is meant by a divided soul. A divided soul is a soul at war with itself, and a house divided cannot stand. For we all know that there is a symbiosis. We know that it's a symbiosis, that there is an interdependency that exists between us, that defines our species. That what affects one directly affects all indirectly. That I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be, and you can never be what you ought to be until I am what I ought to be. We are bound together because of this interrelated structure of reality. No man is an island, said John Donne, entire of itself. Every man is a piece of the continent, a part of the man. Any man's death diminishes me because I am involved with mankind. Therefore, never sin to know for whom the bell tolls. It tolls for thee. Remember now, along with me, that it was centuries ago that the prophet Jeremiah lived in a world very much like our own, a world that is upside down, where bad becomes good and wrong right. They tell me that Jeremiah looked around him and that he noticed all of the inequalities of life. He noticed the good people languishing and the wicked people prospering, and he cried out, "Is there no balm in Gilead? Is there no physician there?" There is a question that reverberates down through the ages and resonates right now down to the present moment. And then centuries later, as our slave foreparents were brought to these shores in chains, they too noticed the inequalities. They had nothing to look forward to morning after morning but the searing sun on their backs, the rawhide whip of the overseer, and row upon row of cotton to be picked. But these slaves did an amazing thing. They took these very daunting and pessimistic circumstances, and they used them as a means of finding a ray of hope. They looked back across the centuries, and hearing Jeremiah's sad lament, they reached out and straightened out that question mark into an exclamation point. And they decided to sing, "There is a balm in Gilead," to make the wounded whole. Well, the Negroes in Montgomery, Alabama in 1955, it was this Christmas season, proved themselves to be worthy descendants of those noble slaves. Because when Mrs. Rosa Parks, a quiet woman of simple dignity, sat down on a bus seat, the Negroes of Montgomery stood up as one. And they vowed and they vowed to themselves that they would walk together until the walls of segregation came tumbling down on those buses. And we walked together for 381 days. There's a lesson that we've got to relearn today, my friends. We've got to relearn, like the labor unions and the craft unions that earlier in the system, that we've got to stick together. We stuck together. We set out to call, no Negroes rode the buses. It was one of the most amazing things I've ever seen in my life. Negroes in Montgomery asked me to serve as their spokesman. And of course, I demurred, for I was new in Montgomery. I did not know the political landscape. I was pastoring my first church. I had a new wife and a new baby. I was not the man. I refused. But they persisted. And there comes a time when you realize that no is not the answer. And so we began our struggle together. Things were going well in the first few days. Oh, we were nearly giddy in our optimism, in our hopes. Then about 10 or 15 days later, when the racists of Montgomery saw that we meant business, they started doing some nasty things. They started making some nasty telephone calls, and some days over 40 or 50 telephone calls would come in threatening my life, the life of my children, the life of my family. Well, I stood it for a while in a strong manner. But then one night, quite late, I never will forget it. It was around midnight. And you can have some strange experiences at midnight. I had been out all that evening meeting with the steering committee planning for tomorrow's activities, and I came home late at night and found my wife and child already asleep, and I crawled into bed right away. I had to get up early the next morning to try to keep things moving. And almost immediately the telephone started to ring. On the other end was an ugly voice. And that voice said to me, "Nigger, we're tired of you and your mess now. And if you are not out of this town in 3 days, we're going to blow your brains out and blow up your house." Well, I had heard these things before and withstood them. For some reason that night it got to me. I turned over and I tried to sleep, but I couldn't sleep. I was frustrated, bewildered. And then I got up and walked back to the kitchen and started warming a pot of coffee, thinking that coffee might bring me relief. And I sat there and I thought about many things. I thought about the noble Mrs. Rosa Parks who had delivered us this floor. I thought about the thousands of Negroes looking to me for leadership. I knew I must be strong, but I was weak. Something said to me, you can't call on Daddy now. He's up in Atlanta 150 miles away. You can't call on Mama now. You have got to call on that something and that person that your daddy used to tell you about. That power that can make a way out of no way. And I bowed down over that cup of coffee. Oh yes, and I prayed a prayer. And I prayed out loud that night. I said, Lord, I'm down here, trying to do what's right. I believe I'm right. I believe that the cause that we represent is right. But Lord, I must confess that I'm weak now, faltering and losing my courage. And it seems to me that at that very moment I could hear another voice say to me, Martin Luther, stand up for justice. Stand up for righteousness. Stand up for truth. And lo, I will be with you always, even to the end of the world. He promised never to leave me alone. Never to leave me alone. Though never alone. Though never alone. He promised never to leave me alone. Sometimes I get discouraged. I don't mind telling you today, friends, that I get discouraged sometimes. As I travel through Alabama, Mississippi, and Georgia with their vicious races, I get discouraged sometimes. Living every day under the threat of imminent death, I get discouraged sometimes. Living every day under extensive criticism, even from Negroes, I get discouraged. Yeah, sometimes I get discouraged and feel that my work's in vain. But then the Holy Spirit comes and revives my soul again. There is a balm in Gilead to make the wounded whole. There is a balm in Gilead to heal the sin-sick soul. I wrote a book about our Montgomery experience, and the publisher sent me out on a book tour. And I found myself in New York City in 1958, signing, autographing books. And I remember I sat there in this department store, large department store in Harlem, signing books, and I noticed on the periphery, I noticed a strange appearing young woman approach the desk. And I sat there, and I was writing, and the only thing that I heard her say was, "Are you Martin Luther King?" And I said, "Yes, I am." And I put my head back down and began writing again, and before I knew it, I felt something pounding on my chest. Before I knew it, I had been stabbed by this demented woman. And the blade had gone through. I was rushed to Harlem Hospital. It was a dark, dreary afternoon. And at the hospital, the doctors discovered that the tip of the blade was sitting right on the tip of my aorta, the main vessel. And when that is punctured, you drown in your own blood. That's the end of it. Came out the next day in the New York Times that if I had even sneezed at that moment, I would have died. Well, several days later, after my chest had been opened and the blade removed, and I can never thank those doctors enough. It's a delicate operation. I was allowed to move around the hospital a bit in a wheelchair. I was allowed to read some of the kind letters that came in wishing me well. And from all over the states and around the world, kind notices came in. And I looked over a few of them. I was weak. But there was one letter that I will never forget. I looked at it and I will never forget it. It was from a young girl, a freshman at the White Plains High School. And I opened that letter and I will never forget it. It said simply, "Dear Dr. King, I am a 13-year-old student, freshman at the White Plains High School." She said that it really should not matter. I would mention that I'm a white girl. She said, "I have read in the news reports of your suffering and of your misfortune. And I have read where it said that if you had sneezed, you would have died. Oh, Dr. King, I'm simply writing this letter today to tell you that I'm so happy that you didn't sneeze." When I think of young girls and young children like that, I know that it does not be long before our country comes to its senses and dismantles barriers against black-colored people. I know it will not be long. Everywhere that I go, every step that I make, I get the same question over and over. How long, Dr. King? How long must we struggle? How much longer must we be attacked by brutal dogs? How long should our children be murdered in Sunday school? How long will prejudice blind the visions of men and darken their understanding and drive bright-eyed wisdom from her sacred throne? How long? When will wounded justice, lying prostrate in the streets of our cities, be lifted from this dust of shame to reign supreme among men? How long? When will the radiant star of hope be plunged against the nocturnal bosom of this lonely night, and plucked from the weary souls of men the manacles of fear and the chains of death? How long will truth be crucified and justice buried? How long must we struggle in this righteous struggle? And I say to the man or woman who asked me today, how long? Simply, directly, without hesitation, without equivocation, not long. How long? Not long. Because there is something in this universe that Greek mythology calls the goddess of nemesis. How long? Not long. Because though the arc of the moral universe is long, let it bend towards justice. Not long because Carlyle is right, no lie can live forever. Not long because William Cullen Bryant is right, truth crushed to earth shall rise again. Not long because James Russell Lowell is right, truth forever on the scaffold, wrong forever on the throne. Yet that scaffold sways the future, and behind the dim unknown standeth God within the shadows, keeping watch above his own. How long? Not long, because the Bible is right. Be not deceived. God is not mocked. For whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap. And that is why I leave you today in this, my midnight hour, not despairing. Why I'm not fearful of any man. I believe that we shall overcome the darkness of this night and emerge in a new and a better place, that we shall make of this old world a new world. Oh, glory. Glory. Glory, hallelujah. Glory, hallelujah. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. He is trampling out the vintage where the grapes of wrath are stored. He has loosed the fateful lightning of his terrible swift sword. His truth is marching on. He has sounded forth the trumpet, which will never call retreat. He is sifting out the souls of men beyond his judgment seat. Oh, be swift, my soul, to answer him. Be jubilant, my feet. Our God is marching on. May God bless and strengthen each and every one of you.
Amen.
God, Lord. Yes.